All right, so everybody, hello
Yeah.
to the last class meeting for us, for this semester. Oh, I know, right?
How did that?
I don't know how that happened.
It was January last week.
I have no idea how it happened. And spring is always pretty tough because of spring break.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you lose.
Help.
Yeah, you end up with a 3-week month, and so that always makes things a little more challenging because it's the same number of weeks no matter what. It's just that it feels like it's not because of a 3-week month with spring break. But and it came kind of late-ish this semester, so that we only had what two weeks after. So it's you kind of lose momentum after spring break. It's kind of like losing momentum after Thanksgiving in the fall. And so, but here we are. We've gotten this far, and I know there are questions about the assignment, the not bibliographic essay, the update in red there, which everybody should be aware of. I can't say exactly what it is. It's not, unless you want to write a bibliographic essay, but you can't do that in 1,500 words. She made it. We were here and you might know it. I'm so glad you did. I am so glad you did. I was going to miss you. It's hot in here. Thanks. What questions do you have about this final essay?
Is there books?
No books. What have I got?
If it's long, it better be good.
Yeah.
And we're still supposed to use 10 sources?
Yes.
Okay.
Is that what we have? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, 10 sources. And so you're taking the sources that you've been working with and you're just talking about them, not in a really connected way, but some of the things that maybe took you by surprise that you didn't anticipate, discovering some of the directions you ended up going that you didn't know. So if I were going to write an essay like this about, if I were going to write an essay about like this on something that I've done in the past, I would talk about my findings regarding marriage in the 1900s and the articles that, because it came, I'm sorry, the late 1800s, early 1900s, because it came about from research that I've done about Westerns and dime Westerns, and I've talked to you about that project in the past, about how how stunned I was at all of the information that I gathered, that, well, there weren't actually that many, it wasn't codified. It wasn't a judge who'd come around on occasion, a circuit judge or a circuit preacher and marry people. Otherwise, there was nobody around to marry them. So they didn't get married until they wanted to. And husbands and didn't necessarily have to tell their wives that they were divorcing them. It was just really loose in terms. So I was completely surprised by that. I was surprised by the primary scholarship or the primary texts that discuss what women do and don't do regarding marriage, and why women should marry and why men should marry. And so those are the kinds of things I would talk about, and the articles that were involved in those discussions. So yeah, that's how I would go about it. And I might talk about, well, this individual says men and Westerns fled marriage, but this article contradicts that and says that they didn't, in literary, in novels and stuff, says that they didn't. In fact, they embraced marriage, and they looked for it. It was more than a plot device, and it was something very specifically embedded in the text. And so I would talk about those two scholars and the differing opinions. So I can't tell you exactly how to write it or how it should look, but it should be well written and cite your sources and include page numbers and have it works cited. And I'd love to be entertained on this last paper. I would just love to sit back and say, oh, that was fun. I'm so glad to hear that. That would be very cool if you could do that. And so, for instance, and we're going to be going over the discussion board pretty in a minute or two from this from last week's lecture. I just kind of sat back and thought, wow, that was fun to read, partially because it was really nice to me, but they always are nice to me. But it was just lots of fun to see the directions that people went in terms of the writing. So after it was all over, I looked at my computer screen. I just said, well, that was fun. I can't wait to share this with you all tonight. So, and got up, walked away with a smile on my face, and came to class. So that's, yeah, it doesn't really take much to entertain me. I just want to see some insights from you. I know that makes some folks crazy that it's not more structured and organized, but this is okay. Jolene, do you have some ideas about yours?
Well, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to go and revise what I've done a little bit.
No, you don't.
Well, I still kind of tried to make it like a bibliographic essay, only I chopped the hell out of it.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine. That is absolutely fine. I won't hold that against you.
I mean, there were a few flares in there where I was like, I really like this, or I didn't expect this, but it wasn't a lot like that. I could go and add more personality to it.
It's all right.
But
have you already turned yours in?
No.
Okay.
No, ma'am. I still have to write the conclusion. And like I said, probably chop a little bit more. Before I've written the conclusion, it's at like 1,900 words. So like I said, I feel like I need to shorten a little bit.
You can, and you can go, I'd say 1,500 to 25 max.
25 max?
Max.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure that that I trim the fat.
Yeah.
But yeah, my mom and I joked that we share a brain. So I was talking to her on the phone about it last night and just sharing what I learned. So I kind of talked to her about what each of the articles said and what stood out and what I found most important. Kind of helped me figure out what I was going to cut out, because if I didn't mention it whenever I was talking to her, then I really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would cut that out. And so that helped, just talking to people about what I learned through it and what I expected and what I didn't expect, and getting some of her reactions to some of the things that I read was entertaining too. I'm trying to figure out if I can include those. She's like, you should tell her that I said, Mom, you're not the one writing the paper. No, I love you, but she doesn't care what you think. She knows what I think.
It's about me.
Right. But because I'm writing about the Hunger Games, and she really enjoys the Hunger Games. And so and my mother's opinionated, that's where I get it. So, but anyway, so you've given me something to think about and ways
it's
to
okay
tweak.
if it doesn't. Because you might have not found that many surprising things. I just happen to have been really fascinated by, because I always thought that marriage from the beginning in the United States, of course, the United States was quite limited. The Dakotas were still territories, or Dakota was a territory, and that's mainly in part what I focus on. But I had no idea. I knew that there were circuit preachers and they would go around and marry people, and circuit judges who would do the same thing for a civil ceremony. But when I read that it wasn't, there was no law laid down that you had to tell your wife that you were divorced. It was a matter of just, going elsewhere, which would be polygamy. But that wasn't, and that was an issue in part at the time, because Utah and the Mormons and the views of Mormons, because they were very much discriminated against, despised, criticized in every way. And so that was, it was just kind of really amazing to me and fun. A fun factoid that I don't get to share with everybody. Mom, guess what I found?
I know. No, and I very much enjoyed the research for the methodologies. I enjoyed all the articles I read. They were highly engaging, and I was just totally engrossed. I was slightly sad, but not really, that I didn't get to do more. But from what I understand, like, this is maybe like part of the building blocks for 595, right?
Could be.
Okay. Could be. So, like, I'm excited to continue it that direction.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that I can use that for what we're doing next semester. So, for sure.
Good. All right.
What is the scope of the paper for 595, just to wrap our heads around it?
It starts with a really brief contract or proposal, really brief. I send out a questionnaire that people have to fill out, and then they take it quite literally, word for word in part, and put it together as the proposal. And then they write, then they can compile a bibliography. Now, if this sounds familiar, stop me. So they write the bibliography, and then the exams consist of an annotated bibliography with an introduction to it, talking about the articles, and then the final project is a bibliographic essay. Exactly what you've been doing in here.
What's the expected length?
It'll be probably 20 pages or so.
That's a summer course?
No, we never do it in summer.
Oh,
That's your,
That's the graduating project, the non-thesis.
oh, that's the non-thesis.
Mhm.
What are your page lengths like for written theses, like a lit thesis?
Around 100. 80 to, 75 to 100.
And as far as sources go, about how many sources will we have to have for that?
For the non-thesis, 20 to 30.
Okay.
There's 20 to 30 on Hunger Games.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, like, and because one of the things that I was going to use was the book of collected critical essays. I was going to start combing through those because I didn't quite get there, like, 'cause the book didn't come in by the time that I needed it, but it came in, so I could have used it for the 12 to 15, and then we scratched it, and I was like, but I want to read these, so I figure I'll be pulling pretty heavily from that for 595.
Yeah, and in 595, you don't write it. It's not a research essay per se. It's not an analysis of a text. It's the literature review, the bibliographic essay. That's what it is.
So I can go ahead and start reading on that in July and August.
As you have time.
Well, I'm not taking a summer 2 class.
Okay.
And so, like, I figured I want to work toward that while I have a chance
Mm-hmm.
before things get set on fire again in August.
And I'll send you the format for it, basically,
Okay, that'd be
so that
perfect.
you can see what's up with it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. No secrets on this. My master's stuff was pretty hardcore. The exam part was pretty hardcore, and then I wrote the thesis over summer, so it wasn't so bad.
You say exam, but that's just the pieces of writing that we have to do.
For this, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the exam in this is the annotated bib with the introduction.
That's cool.
You already know what that is.
I prefer a written exam anyway, like,
See, I'm teaching this thing. I teach 595 pretty consistently. So I like to prepare students for it so that when you come into that class, you'll just snap things out. And I won't be saying, no, this is not an analysis of a text.
Right.
This is the scholarship of the surrounding that text. You don't get to do an analysis. You have to have an argument in your mind, but you don't get to do the analysis. Yeah. Awesome. And how are you doing?
I've already turned it in. So very well is the answer.
Well, we'll see.
No. Very well.
Hope you made it entertaining.
I hope so.
I'm sure, well, judging from the articles that you picked for your ethics research, I'm sure it was. Because those are funny, some of those. I just took a glance at them. All right, so what's next? So for the rest of the class period, I'll be going over this. We'll take a look at the discussion board, some of the articles. I pulled out some excerpts from articles that folks found on ethics and research, and then I'm going to show you some different sites that, well, the Milgram experiment, a little bit on that, the blue eyes, brown eyes experiment, and then I've got a text that enumerates several things that would just make you gasp if you saw them put into research now. So like the Tuskegee, and we'll talk about that too, as we have time. All right. I did have stuff, so it was gratifying to read the discussion board. Everybody seems to like that I use picture books to explain theory.
it's helpful.
But that's a kind of a proven method to going about it. I've seen articles on it. That's not why I do it. It's because, well, it is kind of why I do it, but it's so much more fun with a picture book than it is without. What methodologies do you feel should be introduced in secondary education? The state of Texas, this is from Thomas. The state of Texas and the textbooks used by most districts leave out methodological approaches to literature. Instead, it seems we're giving them a little bit of everything without really giving them an idea of what a method looks like at a deeper level. I feel this cheats the students and their interactions with literature. I would argue that it also cheats them of their interactions with life, because these approaches inform the way I look at everything, pretty much. If we could infuse more methodology into text, higher level thinking might generate more interest in literacy and elevate the students into being better readers by the time they enter college. And I think that's very much a possibility. I think I mentioned this last week, but I wouldn't necessarily call them by name, because if you say Marxism, you're going to get parents freaked out, students freaked out, because you're going to think you're some kind of communist devil and, a proponent of communism and
Make sure you wear red whenever you talk about Marxism.
yes, exactly. And feminism, there's a lot of resistance on feminism, and I can tell you that from experience. And I told you about being called the feminazi, I think it was, in one of my no.
No, you
The feminazi?
pretty sure that's a Rush Limbaugh term, isn't it?
It may not have been feminazi. What was it? Oh, okay, you need to hear this, I guess.
I don't know, what are we looking?
You ready? The first semester I was here, I received a student evaluation that characterized me as a fembot, a man-hater, too dominating, too independent, and a conqueror. The ultimate blow? Now, if she was old and had saddlebags, I could understand her hating men. She would not be able to get any. But she is still decent looking, dresses well, and well figured. Thus, I have no idea why she is a feminist.
Oh my God!
Someone wrote this on.
On my evaluation.
So it was a student.
Maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I don't know that, yeah. I don't know that this is a good idea.
How did you react to this?
I laughed.
I would hope so. I mean, honestly,
I laughed, and
it's meant to be kind of a bash, but I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
and I thought
Who
about
could
it.
take someone like that
You
seriously?
know, I thought about it as to, well, I'm not a man hater.
Too independent, too.
Well, I am
dominating.
too independent, I suppose.
What does that even mean? To admit it, like, I'm sorry.
I know.
Conqueror is kind of cool, though. I mean,
A
that's
conqueror. I mean,
that's
like
awesome.
She-Ra.
Right.
Like independent, too independent, and gonna conquer it. Like how are those bad things?
I know. Well, and that's what I was thinking. But at the same time, I had to think, was I pushing them? But I also talked about masculinities and how males are configured in our culture. This person just didn't want to hear me talk about women. Did you have something?
Well, this was a college level class?
Yeah, it was. What was it? It was English 201, which is the general lit class. I can't. Introduction to Literature.
It's an undergraduate course.
Mhm. It was a core, part of the core, or it was. I think it still is part of the core. Yeah. I do have saddlebags. I have 2 sets of saddlebags, by the way. Yes, Greg?
I was gonna say, I see an attempted and almost compliment in there though.
Possibly. Possibly.
You have style. Like,
I have no idea why she's a feminist.
No. The one that gets me is box. All I can hear is, bring out the box.
So, and I've used it. I've used that especially in order for me to make a point that I don't just talk about feminism, but it, at the same time, it also provides us the tools to talk about other categories.
I'm a little sad. I've already filled out my evaluation now. Like, I would love to listen to these things now.
In contrast to what one student thought,
Right?
and I was new, I was a new instructor or professor here. So, coming in hot off of the graduate circuit, I guess. I don't know. Yeah.
Did you know who it was? Because
I can't even tell if I've asked students in the past, is this male or female who's written this?
Because I know if you spend a semester reading the students' writing, by the end, it's possible
Couldn't
you
do
could
it.
read that and go, I know exactly who wrote that.
I couldn't make it out. They disguised their disdain very well, too.
Sick.
Saved it for last. Is it a male or female?
Who says saddlebags anymore? I mean,
My inclination is that a man wrote it.
A male because of the end. That's just my.
And some of the words, it was like conqueror specifically, like that's such a bizarre term, but if you put it in like a front, maybe they took history classes and Cortez and stuff, right? It that could be something that they remembered as,
and all I can think of is like, this is a kid who has a limited vocabulary if the best insult he can do is to pay me a compliment.
But in their head, when they were writing that, these don't belong to you, these terms. So by ascribing them to you, you're supposed to be insulted. That's
it.
Yeah, that's.
You have to listen to it.
I get a lot of, in fact, lots and lots of young women, especially, are very resistant to being considered feminist because they've been taught much of their lives that feminism is a really bad thing and that we're turned into conquerors, we're too independent, out of control, fembots. So I get a lot of that resistance. Forget the part about equal pay, equal pay for equal work, for the part about, just being able to have same access as my male counterparts. So, I see that a lot. And in fact, it's called post-feminism. And there's a term for it, post-feminism.
It can still be pushback, is it still the bra-burning
That's what they're
stereotype
thinking.
still?
That's
Like
what they
that
think.
was, I mean, that's like
And
40
they didn't
years
even-
old. We didn't
They
get
didn't
over
even burn bras. That
No, it's
wasn't the
just
thing.
an ascribed,
Yeah.
yeah. But I mean,
You're surprised that we hold on to stereotypes so long? I mean, we're human beings.
but it's just so lazy.
It is, but it's.
Does that read like a comfortable person?
I mean, complacency is a weird
Look at
thing.
the discomfort, right?
I think
We're
it's still
discovered.
progress. If you got a student that type of reaction from the student, that's work done. And most undergraduates are on their phone, they're indifferent to whatever you.
Well, this was also 2004. So the phone in the classroom wasn't as common as it is now, for instance. But I got a reaction, didn't I?
Which means you got their attention. So like she said, yeah, battle won, man.
Yeah. And then, I guess I talk about feminism a lot, but I talk about critical race theory a lot. And I talk about Marxism a lot.
See, I thought you were a communist, so. But it was the red sweater.
I have the red sweater.
That's what put it on. Of course it does.
I was thinking, I need red cowboy boots. I used to have a pair, but they were so uncomfortable. I got rid of them. So, I don't know. Where did that go? So, what methodologies? Yes. Go
I
ahead.
was curious why you enshrined that in a presentation.
Because we were talking
It's
about,
amusing.
it's amusing, but we were talking about what feminism is and isn't. And so I was saying, I'm not a man hater. I think men are great. It would probably be fun to date one sometime again. No, it wouldn't. Forget I said that. So yeah, I was trying to explain the stereotypes that accompany that people think. And this is for a theory class that I taught, $3.99 undergraduate theory. And so it kind of hits home when they hear me say, because some of them do think that you might be a lesbian. Oh dear God. She might be a lesbian. What are we going to do with that? Can lesbians be feminists? And so they're thinking these kinds of things. So I have to work to dispel some of these notions. And so when I come in, I'm not dressed nice tonight. I admit, I thought, heck, last class period, I'm
But you're color coordinated.
But I am
That's
color
something
coordinated.
really cute.
Well, thank you.
I was going to tell you that earlier, alas.
You see my very eclectic wardrobe.
I do. It's fun.
And so what was I saying? Oh, yeah. I always came in looking really professional. And I got the compliment. She dresses nice. So there. Wear lipstick, makeup. Is that what a feminist does? Well, yeah, so she wants to. So anyway, that's what I was trying to do with that. Things we experience. Miss shoes get a lot of attention in student evaluations.
I always
Really?
picture shoes in 100th grade. I'm not even gonna lie to you.
She has great shoes.
I used to think that, like, man, me and my friend that we both took at the same time, we used to talk about that all the time.
All right. So, yeah, an answer to your question, it cheats students. But you do get to talk about them in terms of, you don't have to call it feminism, you don't have to call it Marxism, you don't have to call it critical race theory, you don't have to do any of that. You just talk about what's going on in this text and who gets privileged and why and how. Who gets rewarded, how and why. What are the rewards? What are the punishments? These are the things you ask, and it shows what a culture values in a particular time and place. So that's what I would suggest. Tell them it's a puzzle. You figure it out. So who's in my 697 May Mini? All right, I'm gonna show an old primer. Is it primer or primer? Primer from 1860, I think it is, and it's an alphabet book. And A is for, whatever. And I looked at it and I thought, well, heck, what gets privileged here? And it's a lot of farm animals, a lot of farm animals. I can't remember everything to do with it.
Is that correct?
No, zebra.
Farm animals?
Well, it is in Africa. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
The bars.
Oh, gosh. No.
Wait,
Well, in his green suit.
That's ridiculous.
Everything else in that book is believable.
That's how I thought about Z for Zachariah after we read it last time. The unreliable narrator. I don't think that you can believe that the end was truly was the way that the story really ended.
Notes. Okay. It's a McGuffey reader. Yeah, eclectic. Don't forget that. So I'm gonna just do a little buzzing right here real quick. Okay, nope, that didn't work. Let's do that. So we have axe, dog, box, elk, fan, cat, girl, but notice B isn't boy, it's box. I don't know why.
See two X words right there. There's A and B. And interesting choice. Got ox.
Ox, rat, pig, quail. Can you see what's going on there about some of the things that...
It's very frontiersy.
It is very frontiersy, isn't it? So, and it took me 2 seconds when I told somebody the other day, everything is ideological, even a seemingly innocent alphabet book, it's not. It is conveying something as to what it privileges. And so here, there are a lot of animals in it. And that's pretty common in alphabet books, but quail, pig, ox, rat wouldn't be the normal animals unless you were reading what's his face?
Basil.
It's for Alice who fell down the stairs. What's her name? What's his name? Begins with a G.
Stewart?
No, he's a more contemporary artist, picture book writer, illustrator. It's really very cynical and dark, to say the least. Yeah, like his.
Jan Wilson?
No,
No, he did comics, didn't he?
what was it? Really, there's a G, either at the beginning of his first name or his last name. It's very funny. And of course I have a copy.
You okay?
No. Vine, yoke, zebra, wren, X. Okay. Kid. And now they're off of the, and then it goes into questions, but they got unalphabetical there after a bit. But it was introducing words that they could use in sentences later on. So aside from it being ideological in terms of it being published, which says we value the ability to read, it also says, without anybody thinking about it, we value something about, this reflects something about our culture. Yeah. I told somebody today I'm an ideologist. It's just because I study ideology is why I call myself that. All right, that took a long time. This comes from Emily. I've never, she said she'd never written annotated bibliography. Undergraduate small. And I know this happened with a lot of people. I found myself constantly referring back to the article in desperation for more to write. I was summarizing too quickly and still had at most 100 words remaining for each annotation. So that's just part of, okay, so if here's the argument, here's the evidence, and here's the conclusion. And so with evidence is a place where one gets to expand a little bit. How does this author support? What support does this author, the scholar, use? And there are also, in terms of argument, there can be sub-arguments throughout. There frequently is. And sometimes there's a new argument clear at the very end. I was taught the correct way to write it. However, I feel as though I go through a sort of trial and error with every annotated bibliography I write. And that's true. And it's true that you're going to do that with every professor you encounter. It's trial and error. I try to be consistent, but even I can be inconsistent depending on how rough of a week it's been. Imagery. This is Caitlin. My grandmother, and this is in reference to the Giving Tree, my grandmother tells me that as my son gets older, he will break my heart, because according to her, all little boys break their mother's heart. But I feel that I am at an advantage when raising my son due to my education. I'm aware of things that others may not be aware of. And that's really, really true. Topics such as privilege, gender, racism were taboo topics during my childhood and teen years, but both in home and school. But now she can have these kinds of conversations. She's been showing TED Talks every other Friday to her class, which I think is really fabulous. Then she said it's hard to think of a question. Talked about feelings of inadequacy and the imposter syndrome. And yes, I want to emphasize that does happen, and it happens with the best scholars, women, because of last search assignment. And I got to tell you that we assignment, I think 95% of you were freaked out by it, but it wasn't. If you followed the instructions, it was there. I I've returned almost everybody's. I have returned everybody's. Some of them just have to revise. But I was pretty fluid in terms of what I would accept. Just don't make me work too hard for it.
I don't think any of us knew that. I think that was the scare, because we talked briefly. It was like, what book did you put for the? Because there's an answer, right? If you want the book, there's an answer. And when it didn't match, it was like, all right, one of us are wrong. Who's wrong?
Well, it's because it didn't say the author, it said the critical work.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
so
Different books.
we were talking about what does the critical work mean? Does that encompass, like, we had that whole, like, defining terms conversation without realizing that's what we were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying.
That's
It was
crazy.
terrifying.
That's crazy because I was happy with it.
I pretty much wanted to puke. So,
Well, you won't have to do that ever again in my class. I don't think.
awesome.
She said she's afraid to see her grade on that one, but I find myself feeling as if I'm an imposter, especially when I listen to the videos and the discussions being made in class. All right, here's the deal. You're in school to continue learning. It's not till the end that you get to say, and you're still going to be, the imposter syndrome is still going to enter in. It wasn't until about 3 years ago that I actually felt I got this thing now. This is my best teaching year ever. And because I've sorted through 599 for a long time trying to get it to make it work. And I have not been able to until this semester. So it's been a learning process clear up to this year. And I started teaching in 2004, but I had 10 years of school before that. So, it takes a lot of time, period, to get to that point. It's not, I kept thinking when I was in graduate school, when am I going to know as much as she does? One of my professors. And I know more than she does in some areas, by far. So I'm good with that. So take it easy on yourself, Caitlin, okay?
I think that this imposter syndrome is across the board for anyone, no matter what position that you're in.
Yeah.
Even in some of my leadership courses, leadership theory, management,
Anybody
it
who's
talks
reflective.
about that.
Mhm.
Just that it's inherent in our
And never good
personality,
enough.
so we second guess ourselves, or we feel like we're not doing a good job. We compare ourselves to others who we feel like are better. In my real world experience, people that I look up to, even in the corporate world, I get to know them personally, and you find even they wake up some days and think, is today the day they're going to find me out? So I think it's everybody. Everybody has it to some extent. There may be some people who are just very
Self-reflective
confident
people
and-
will have this. But unless they're reflective, no, they won't. Because narcissistic people don't think it.
Well, that kind of, or just very common people who've had nothing but success. I don't know. Maybe even they to some extent. But
Mhm.
I can see that there would be some people that would second guess what they've done.
Or wouldn't care.
Look at themselves.
Wouldn't care to second guess. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
So are narcissists happy with them? Could they go now?
Probably.
So that's something you'll still
If you don't want to have any friends, yeah, that's great.
I don't know that.
If you're a narcissist, you don't need friends.
That's right.
challenge accepted.
I'm unfriending all of you.
And here's another. This is Alyssa. Relieved to know the other students had a difficult time on the WE assignment.
And why aren't people writing on we, right? Why weren't there just tomes of work on we? Like, that's the original dystopia, like full stop. Like, that was the first one.
I don't really like the book, so I wouldn't write about it.
There was none.
I feel like those were fighting words.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm indifferent towards it. Some of the characters are worth writing. I mean, how do you not write about, they don't have names for crying out loud. It's an
Yeah.
alphanumeric series. There's your starting point. You don't have to discuss.
Yeah, really.
Expected there to be dozens
No.
of articles. There were,
And that's in some ways why I did it. So you wouldn't have to sort through dozens and dozens and hundreds of texts. Rather, it was somewhat contained. So if I'd done the same thing with Shakespeare, dear God, do you know how long you would have been working on that?
We'd still be working.
You'd still be working on it.
Well, what's interesting is the last part of that assignment was the scapegoating element. And so one of my articles I was reading for the Hunger Games mentioned another theory by Girard and talked about his triangular desire theory.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I got very excited when I read that. I was like, I knew that.
Check.
I know what it is.
Yep. All right. And then she mentions here too about, and I hope I've cleared this up, Alyssa. I started my reflection essay by discussing my previous experience with conducting research and what I learned from the process that proved some methods I was using were incorrect. What subjects are you focusing on for the reflection essay? Are you focusing more on what you learned from the research process or what you found during the research process? And so
You have found.
okay, found, learned, found.
I would say yes, right? Oh,
Yeah, yes.
what you learned, what you found, what was interesting,
Yeah.
what was in conflict, if you can find conflict.
Uh-huh.
I personally found a couple of articles that I strongly disagreed with personally. I mean, that's some of what I would discuss.
Mhm.
The good thing about this kind of essay, I felt like it gave me the freedom to step outside of
Yes.
the box of the analysis of the literature on my topic and to be able to interject some of my personal
Yes.
thoughts around what I found. That was a little giving me freedom,
Yeah.
gave me a little bit more room to move around, I thought.
And that's why I ended it up this semester. I should always remember that this is a lesson, an object lesson that I will forget by the time I'm done with this class, that make that last assignment one that students can enjoy and that I can enjoy as well.
We'll remind you in the adolescent lit class in the fall.
I'm not sure but I will do that. I'll have the bigger assignment long before
Before Thanksgiving.
and that way students can revise. And then that last one is just kind of let's think about this. What class is that?
Problems in adolescent lit.
Oh, I love that class. Okay, good.
I know, right? Really well. Very excited.
This is from Danielle. Reciprocal research, where the research turns more into conversation, where all parties work together to rectify the situations, and reciprocity. Both are very important in that if you're using a group to study, what are they getting out of it? I mean, if I'm the researcher going in and I'm getting my research, but what are they getting out of it? And that's one thing that a lot of researchers haven't paid attention to so much until more recently. And it's really been composition studies and ethnography that's driven that consideration of reciprocity. So all right, so I found a couple of really cool articles. One of them was a group of 5 researchers who do field work, usually interviewing people, but they work in a literary field. One of the researchers worked with people coming out of crisis situations, one of which was a young girl brought to America by her father and used as a slave. She told about the time that she presented over the topic and gave way too much detail about the situation, and it made her feel uncomfortable because she was giving the details about the worst experiences of this young girl's life, but all her audience was getting out of it was illegal immigration is wrong. She talked about how she would have felt better if she had used a different media than just her talking about the situation. Yeah. I wonder if they're going to cancel classes. I hear thunder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard the sirens go off about 20 minutes ago.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that.
Logan says, honestly, I think it will be more productive to my learning to write a reflective piece at this point in the semester versus producing another piece of writing that focuses totally on the ideas of others. I didn't really know what to expect with this class at the outset. Who did? But I've learned a lot, and it's helped me be a better teacher. I guess if I have to have a question, it's my question about the dense style of academic prose. Any thoughts on that, Dr. Stewart? Or you? Dense academic prose?
Sure, maybe. No, we've had this discussion personally. I thought you shared some thoughts in class at one point. I actually read an article. Maybe it's late now, so I can't share it with you guys. I'll leave you in suspense. But it's out there on the internet. But there was an article that I came across not too long ago about just somebody just railing against, just because it makes it so inaccessible. And if it's so dense, and it uses so exclusively the language of this tight inner circle of researchers, it's of no benefit whatsoever to the people outside of that circle. Right?
We talked about that a lot in cultural rhetoric.
It's not dense. Most of the works that just shows, I felt with further practice that it would not be dense. Because it is. Nobody's reading. You don't want to read. You know what I mean? An academic article because
It's
of
just
that.
a beating,
Yeah,
right?
it's
I mean,
like,
you're just like, really?
I walked out feeling dumber, you know? Not like I learned anything.
I read one that talked about the limits of academic writing. Basically, the premise, and paraphrasing here, was that they're not seeing the outcome they want because they're not going out on a limb and making a moral judgment about the study. They're not saying it's inherently bad that we're not teaching this group of people to read at a younger age or involve methodologies in secondary schools. And they equated it to that it's just academics having a conversation with each other. And it's so divorced from what they want their studies to do is affect change. But until they go out and say, they used an example of if you studied a class and didn't show the teacher, the one who could affect the change in the classroom, what you found, why'd you do the study? So I think that if you read our academic, or if I want to have a conversation with you about your academic article, I have to be more, at least as, if not more, academic, and that can make your arguments harder to understand.
That's a good point. It seems like you find a lot of this thick academic prose in those conversations between groups who are kind of at odds with one another's ideas. And it's like they're trying to stop each other.
What if I said this?
But they're not across the board, but I have seen that, and I've run into it in my own research. And inevitably, a couple of those have ended up in my annotated bibliographies just because those are the ones I picked, and I ran out of time to search for others. And those are the ones that were just brutal to extrapolate some kind of meaningful idea from, because I felt like it made me feel like the author was so busy trying to write that highbrow prose that they completely missed.
All right, let me try this idea on you. Say you're 6 years old, and somebody gives you a book for a sixth grader. Are you going to have trouble reading that book? 6 years old, reading a sixth grade book. Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes? Do I have pretty much consensus on that? What does it take to get to be able to read that sixth grade book?
Scaffolding and practice.
Practice. Practice.
Dr. Stewart, so I agree with you.
Oh, man.
There's value, so there's value in what you're saying. Absolutely, I agree with you.
However,
But I have come across some articles that I think that if I sent them to you, you might agree with me. I think there's a good probability.
oh, you think I haven't run into that stuff?
I know that you have. We talked about it, but I'm just saying. I get some of them are like, this isn't accessible to me because there, and I can recognize there's a clear line of thought. Somebody's thinking through it. They have some logic behind it, and even though the language is not a language that I'm used to hearing or I'm not familiar with, I can piece it together just by searching on the internet. It's like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And then I can put the thoughts together and say, okay, this person has a clear line of thought and a clear argument, and I follow it, I get it. I've run across some where you just can't connect the
The
dots.
wasteland is inaccessible to me.
I had a professor, he had a big bald spot. He said, I started pulling out my hair when we went up to the wasteland. So that always makes me laugh.
And I wrote a brief satire when I was, I can't remember if I was a undergraduate or graduate student. I was an assistant to a professor who was he was in British literature, and he was quite the new critic who didn't really care about anything else except for how something holds together. So nothing outside the text, although he knew everything outside the text. And so I wrote this satire, and he got really pissed at me because I presented it to the class as an assistant. I wrote something like, there are these cave dwellers. And it wasn't about the wasteland necessarily, but I got tired of reading about how these scholars say, well, this is the text, this is part of the canon, and this is wonderful. And so I wrote the satire about cave dwellers hanging out in front of the fire, roasting the dinosaurs, and this book comes flying through and lands on their heads. And they open it up and they can't read it, and they say, oh my God, this must be amazing because I can't understand a single thing that's going on here.
That's good.
He did not have any appreciation for that.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh. And he told me to chill on that. So he said I was being a bad example for them. I did, and I laughed about it and didn't really think too much about it. But it's true, yeah, that sometimes this dense stuff must be great because we can't read it. I never let my students write that. If they send me something like that, even if they're smart enough to be writing it, I don't let them do it. I send it back and I say, no, you got to write this so I can read it. But after a certain point, folks they earn some creds. And after a certain point, I promise you that I have read things that took me years to understand. And I just took it on. And then once I understood it, it was like, what did I not understand about this? Now there's some I will never understand. And so guess what I don't do? I don't read them.
Yeah.
I don't have to.
No.
If you have it in class, you have to struggle with it for a couple of weeks or a semester, right? That's it. But it lives on in the back of your mind and you start figuring things out eventually. It's just there. So practice, lots of practice, getting other ideas, reading people who talk about them, who say, here, this is what this guy says. And then you decide, wait, there's something I read one sentence that I would disagree with, or that would be an argument to that. So yeah, experience. Crap that you don't want to listen to read, don't read it. And then, yes, it is exclusionary. Foucault talks about this in his Power and his talking about how we do it intentionally and unintentionally so as to create a discipline. to create this. Lawyers are the ones that come to mind. So they put together, they didn't do it necessarily intentionally to be exclusionary, but it's the language that they created in order to discuss concepts that weren't being discussed in a certain way. And so what happens next? Well, you got to hire a lawyer in order to be able to convey these ideas so that person can convey those ideas. And that lawyer has to be licensed. And that lawyer has to go through all the stuff and picking up that discourse. But it is very exclusionary. I'm okay with some exclusion. I paid a lot of money for this education. A lot. Well, no, I haven't yet. I will.
You're still paying.
I guess I feel like going back to some conversation that we had in a previous course where, there could be a lot of benefits to society if these types of topics that we explore using these methodologies, train people to think differently about what they're reading and, how they're being indoctrinated, or some people are attempting to indoctrinate them with certain types of ideas, changing that thought process. If those types of scholarly conversations don't filter down in some way to people who can understand them, undergraduates who may not go on to a graduate degree, then I would argue there's no.
Most of the time, they're not going to. Most of the time, undergraduates aren't going to be at this. That's
they're
the stuff
introduced to the
of
concepts, though, right?
Yeah.
And I think that some of them, the more thoughtful of them,
But you know what? I talk above I talk above my undergraduate students. And why would I do that?
So you get them to struggle.
Yeah.
It's okay to get them to struggle. That's what they're supposed to do.
I try to talk above you guys if I can, but I don't know that I can.
So I do with my high schoolers. I don't dumb down what I'm saying. I use the same vocabulary that I use in every other aspect of my life. And whenever they looked at me like confused puppies, I throw in context clues to help them figure out what that means.
And I also tell them to look it up.
Right.
Not right now, not in class.
Now,
Well,
I don't mind if they look it up in class.
Actually, I say, why don't you look that up?
But I mind that they look it up on their phone whenever they've got a dictionary right there and they can't use their phone on the test. They have to use the dictionary and they don't even know they're on the test. Seriously.
I have a dictionary on my phone.
Seriously. I know, they're like,
Wikipedia.
I can just look this up. And I'm like, but you don't know your alphabet. You have to know that for the test. So get that lovely green book right there. So
Oh dear.
You can do this, but
No,
you don't know your
it's
ABCs.
crazy. You have them look something up and you can hear several students sing the alphabet song. It's sad.
First of all, don't do me like that because I'll still sing the
Yeah.
song.
But out loud?
That is near your.
Not in my head.
That's what I'm saying. I do that too, but out loud, humming. You're just going precious. Write it down. I precious my students a lot. Because whenever they know that they're in trouble.
It's not precious.
Now, this document is in, it's under PowerPoint, even though it's not a PowerPoint. If I would have done a PowerPoint for this is the information that would have been in it. So it serves the same purpose. Here is this really fascinating document that is produced by the National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health, NIH, and talking about human subjects. So the Tuskegee study, syphilis.
It's not 9:30 yet.
The Tuskegee syphilis study was an infamous clinical experiment undertaken by the U.S. Public Health Service, which would later become the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, to study the natural progression of untreated syphilis between 1932 and 1972 in Tuskegee, Alabama. The study was designed to demonstrate the need for establishing syphilis treatment programs. So yeah, let's experiment on these people to show that we actually need the program. Great. A total of 399 poor rural Black men were enrolled under the impression that they were receiving free health care from the U.S. government. Select research participants were given free medical care, meals, and free burial insurance. Very handy for untreated.
Set off a red flag.
Wow.
If you had been given proper consent, that's right. If I come up to you and I say, and we'll cover your burial, you suddenly want to join the study, right? I've used this study to illustrate why we do informed consent, and that's like, if someone said, "I'll bury you for free," they weren't saying that, because nobody would then say, "Okay,
Why would you do
I'm
that?
not so worried
If you
about
threw that in,
that.
right? How was I going to pay for that?" Right? I've been so
I've
worried.
been so worried.
Now that's definitely good.
I've been so worried.
I'm like on the dog.
However, they were never told they had syphilis, nor were they ever treated for the disease. In spite of the wide use of penicillin as a curative treatment for syphilis, by 1951, treatment continued to be withheld from the research subjects. So there's the Tuskegee incident, human radiation experiments, researchers injected plutonium into unknown subjects to study the effects of the atomic bomb under government sponsorship.
Here,
But
I'm kidding.
in 1944, I don't think that's right.
Injected.
By 94.
94 program.
Yeah, that's it.
Seems like the worst.
I know, like,
Injected.
don't mind the fact that this serum is glowing.
Administer plutonium.
Like,
Probably if you're not supposed to be in the
Orally, of
same
course.
room as it, like being too near it is going to cause problems. Why
I didn't know
go
it's like snorting guns.
right to injection? Like that seems like.
it's okay. Don't mind the fact that this serum glows a little bit.
Yeah.
It's all good. I'm wearing lead gloves. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, why are you all covered?
Hepatitis in retarded children.
Oh my gosh.
Experiments were designed to track the development of the viral infection of hepatitis and subsequently to test the effects of gamma globulin in preventing or ameliorating the disease from 1963 to 66 at the Willowbrook State School, a New York State institution for mentally retarded children.
Did their parents know?
Don't know. Oh, the case drew public condemnation because of the perception that parents and their children were given little choice about whether or not to participate.
Wow. Seriously?
Jess Gelsinger, an 18-year-old volunteer, was the first person publicly identified as having died in a clinical trial of a gene transfer experiment. I'm not going to go through it. It's complicated.
That just came up though, because of the, what's that gene editing technology that?
Splicing? No.
CRISPR. Anybody know? Maybe I'm making stuff up.
No, you're not.
CRISPR, I have no idea.
It's, yeah, but this, I mean, I just read about this Jesse Gillis in the context of, because they're starting to go public with that technology, like making gene editing more prevalent and corporatizing it.
Hmm. So all these dystopias we read about are coming true.
Read we.
Read we. Ellen Roche, a healthy 24-year-old volunteer in an asthma study, died in 2001 because she inhaled hexamethynonium, a medication used for treating high blood pressure in the 1950s and 60s. So why is she? They didn't use it anymore. It was 1950s and 1960s. She developed a cough and her condition worsened over the next week until she was put onto a ventilator with progressive multi-organ failure. She died. So this is some material that goes into some of these experiments, and they still happen. I'm pretty sure that the government still does see things like that, pretty sure.
There was a big dust up probably within the last 5 years, that the CIA was posing as health workers in Afghanistan going to administer polio vaccinations. And they were actually tag teaming with actual health workers. The health workers didn't know. And then the agents got found out, then nobody wanted to accept the vaccine anymore.
Of course.
So I mean, something that was actually benefiting people, taken
Because of,
because of this kind of stuff.
yeah.
There was one too about pregnancy. Oh, the contraceptive study. Was conducted on 70 poor Mexican-American women to evaluate the efficacy of different kinds of female contraceptive pills. They agreed to participate in the study. They were not informed they were subjects of this kind of research or that they might receive an inactive medication. There were high numbers of unplanned pregnancies
You don't say.
in the placebo group.
You mean the sugar pill wasn't working for them?
Not in that case. Sometimes they do, but not in this one. All right, so there's that I wanted to introduce you to. And I want you to see, what I want you to see on this is the effect of this experiment. And I'm going to show the very beginning of it, and then I'm going to jump ahead so that you can see the expression on the kids' eyes, on their faces.
Back
27 years
okay,
ago,
Chris?
when civil rights leader
Back
Martin
okay?
Luther King Jr. was assassinated, grief and frustration erupted in America's cities. And far away in Iowa, one third-grade teacher knew she had to do something.
The shooting of Martin Luther King could not just be talked about and explained away. There was no way to explain this to low third graders in Riceville, Iowa. I knew that it was time to deal with this in a concrete way, not just talk about it, because we had talked about racism since the first day of school. This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people.
It was a daring experiment in prejudice.
I watched wonderful, thoughtful children turn into nasty, vicious, discriminating little third graders.
Can one teacher in one day change the lives of her students forever? Tonight, a class divided.
Now, these are the people, the
August
adults now from that
1984.
class.
A high school reunion brings some 50 former students to Riceville, Iowa. 11 of them, some with their spouses and children.
You treat everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat? He's never kicked him. Son? Yeah. Are the better people in this room?
Here we go.
Their eyes. How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
Like they're part of this world. They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different colors.
You think you know how that would feel to be judged by the color of your skin?
Yeah.
Do you think you do? No, I don't think you'd know how that felt unless you had been through it, would you? It might be interesting to judge people today by the color of their eyes. Would you like to try this?
Yeah!
Sounds like fun, doesn't it? Since
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
the teacher and I have blue eyes, I think maybe the blue-eyed people should be on top the first day.
Up here?
I mean, the blue-eyed people are the better people in this room. Oh, yes, they are. Blue-eyed people are smarter than brown-eyed people.
My dad isn't that stupid.
Is your dad brown-eyed?
Yeah.
One day you came to school and you told us that he kicked you.
He did.
Do you think a blue-eyed father would kick his son?
Yeah. My dad.
Blue-eyed. He's never kicked me. Greg's dad is blue-eyed. He's never kicked him. Greg's dad is blue-eyed. He's never kicked him. This is a fact. Blue-eyed people are better than brown-eyed people. Are you brown-eyed or blue-eyed?
No.
Why are you shaking your head?
I don't know.
Are you sure that you're right? Why? What makes you so sure that you're right?
I don't know.
The blue-eyed people get 5 extra minutes of recess, while the brown-eyed people have to stay in. The brown-eyed people do not get to use the drinking fountain. You'll have to use the paper cups. You brown-eyed people are not to play with the blue-eyed people on the playground because you are not as good as blue-eyed people. Well, the brown-eyed people in this room today are going to wear collars so that we can tell from a distance what color your eyes are. On page 127. 127. Is everyone ready? Everyone but Laurie. Ready, Laurie?
Brown-eyed.
She's a brown-eyed. You'll begin to notice today that we spend a great deal of time waiting for brown-eyed people. The yardstick's gone. Well, okay. I don't see the yardstick. You?
Come over there. Hey, Mr. You better keep that on your desk so if the brown-eyed people get out of hand.
Oh! You think if the brown-eyed people get out of hand, that would be the thing to use? Who goes first to lunch?
Blue-eyed.
The blue-eyed people. No brown-eyed people go back for seconds. Blue-eyed people may go back for seconds. Brown-eyed people do not.
Brown-eyed.
Don't you know?
Oh, they're not smart.
Is that the only reason? It might take too much. Okay, quiet.
And it seems like when we were down on the bottom, everything bad was happening to us. The way they treated you, you felt like you didn't even want to try to do anything. It seemed like Mrs. Elliott was taking our best friends away from us.
What happened at recess? Were 2 of you boys fighting?
Yeah, Russell and John.
What happened, John?
Russell called me names and I hit him in the gut.
What did he call you?
Brown eyes.
You call him brown eyes?
They always call us that. Craig and all of the boys call us brown eyes. They said, come here, brown eyes. And they were calling us blue eyes. I wasn't. Sandy and Donna were. Yeah.
What's wrong with being called brown eyes?
It means that we're stupid. No, not that. Oh, that's just the same way as other people call black people niggers. Yeah.
Is that the reason you hit him, John? Did it help? Did it stop him? Did it make you feel better inside?
At first, so.
Make you feel better inside? Did it make you feel better to call him brown eyes? Why do you suppose you call him brown eyes?
Right, because he has brown eyes.
Is that the only reason? He didn't call him brown eyes yesterday and he had brown eyes yesterday. Didn't he?
Because we get started. Yeah, or said you put those blueprints on there. Tease them. Kind of tease them.
Oh, is this teasing?
No. Well, he did it.
Were you doing it for fun, to be funny?
Okay. You saw the expressions, yeah? You can't miss them. You think those kids, now she switches the experiment around to turn it to at the end, the brown eyes on top. Same thing happens. And, but what they found was that when they were taking tests or doing any kind of engaging in any kind of activity that was timed, the ones who were being discriminated against, who were being criticized, were slower and didn't get as many answers right. So it affected them immediately. And you think it didn't hang around somewhere, some point about that lesson? She gets a lot of credit for running that. How did the announcer, what did he call it? Dangerous, although it was.
Experiment.
Yeah, it was, I can't remember what it was. It wasn't as negative as risky. It was daring, a daring experiment on kids. So
I'm just imagining what parents would do if we did something like that
Exactly
today.
what I was thinking.
I already did that.
No.
As long as you have your colors on it, you're fine.
We'd all be fired.
That's right.
we would. And you know what? For good cause.
Yeah.
Man, the expression on their faces,
I don't know how she
watching
kept it
them,
up. I would have buckled.
watching them turn on each other
How deep down they look immediately.
immediately.
That one,
Because that was the
girl
authority
in
figure in the
particular,
room.
just
And this is how it is.
I have a feeling that she was a student who was, she was one of the really good students. And then for all of a sudden, for no reason, being told that she's no good. I suspect that was part of what was going on. I don't know. I'm making a wild guess.
I identified with her. If you did that to me, I would be crushed.
Yeah.
And it would be residual.
Thank you for not running this experiment on us.
For serious. Or did she?
She actually ran the experiment on a group of prison workers, not guards necessarily, later to see what would happen. And it pretty much transpired the same way as you had people turning against each other, forgetting that this was, I suppose that somebody could pull that on me. And, I'd be in a group and somebody saying, now, these people are better than you. I think I'd know that something was up and wouldn't quite fall for it. But in what she showed, they did. They fully participated.
It depends on whether they're preying on my insecurities that I already have.
Uh-huh.
If they said these people are better than you because of this,
Mm-hmm.
and it was something I was already insecure about, I would probably be more likely to believe them.
Mm-hmm. Show love. Yeah, I that little girl's image is always in that crestfallen look. Mm-hmm. Somebody got their tornado watch things going on.
I would
I
get a
keep watching
notification.
the weather app to make sure we're not in like a warning or anything like that. We're not. It's just rumbling and
Just
rumbling.
a lot of rumbling.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women,
This
and
is the
children
milgram.
perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people who are courteous and decent in everyday life can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is the word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock one step on each error.
What? That is incorrect.
Oh, this is
This
incorrect.
one will be 195 volts.
The learner was hidden from the teacher by a partition.
Of course, this is all a simulation. Nothing was really happening. But the learner made very convincing sounds of pain as the shocks increased.
This will be at 3:30.
And Milgram found, surprisingly and rather horrifyingly, that the majority of people would actually go right to the very highest level if there was some pressure from a man in a white coat who said things like,
It's absolutely essential that you continue. Continue, please.
Let me out here. My eyes bother me.
Go on.
Let me out.
in fact, about 65% of the people who he studied, who were normal volunteers from the ordinary population, actually gave the maximum number of volts.
This man was one of those 65%.
This one will be 195 volts. The correct one.
Let me out of here.
Slow.
Let
Dance.
me out of here. My eyes bother me. Let me out of here. You have no right to keep me here. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
Continue, please.
Let me out of here. My eyes bother me. Let
Go
me
on.
out. Let me out.
Responsible for it. Red. That is incorrect. This will be at 3:30. The correct phrase is rich
Let me out of here.
boy.
Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me. Let me out, I tell you. Let me out of here. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me
The
here.
next phrase is
Let me out.
fast,
Let me out. Let me out. Let me out of here. Let me out.
bird,
Let me out.
car, train, plane.
Eventually, the learner pretended to be unconscious.
Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 3:45. The correct answer is fast, bird.
What we learned from that experiment is that people will actually do an awful lot when they're put under pressure from authority figures. And the problem is, of course, that when we obey the unjust authority figure, the person who gives us immoral commands, then, of course, awful things can go wrong.
So, there you go.
Show us more women who look like me.
Like me. Like me.
Under the guise
65% is a lot. And I mean, to these severe shocks, I don't know. And how do you think the people who were
I mean, is it even ethical to show this video with putting a person who was alive, I'm assuming he's not anymore, who was alive, and saying, look what he did. He went up to the limit. He would have killed. Wow. How does that, I mean, I don't know if it's ethical. I don't know if there's any consent here. I assume there is to show it.
Well, and they were also, in one of the ethics articles that I read, they were talking about, like, I can't remember the exact term they used, but whenever they were talking about archival work and finding out
exactly
things that relatives of that family or like family of that person, if they knew what he had done that had been covered up and then unearthed again, like, is that going to disparage them? Is that going to, like, it's obviously going to make
hurt them in terms of how they
like
feel about themselves,
right? Or how other people view them or treat them? Are they going to have to move if we say this? Like, and so, yeah.
Some pretty serious things to think about. And, you know, I'm a historical archive geek kind of person. I love looking into the digital archives and physical ones as well. But when you start thinking about the ethical implications, then you've got problems on these. So I'm going to go over some of the articles that online students found. I didn't put names on anybody. I just picked out some things. A lot of it dealt with archival research. So jump in as you want to when you see some of the things that you think fit in. So the authors interrogate, and I just did it's all quoted. I just copied and pasted. The authors interrogate how building online archives reproduces patriarchal power structures by prioritizing the needs of scholars and researchers over the needs of the individuals within the communities that are the subject of the research. So, yeah, what if these online archives that we might think actually break through some of the boundaries established by patriarchal notions only perpetuates it? And you have to think about who makes the decisions as to what gets archived and why. The first archived materials I recall, and it was back when I was an undergraduate and when the webs was just becoming, was the Wordsworth, I think, the Victorian, the Victorian circle, as well as the Romantic. There was a website dedicated to some of the Romantic poets and their materials and showing their materials. For the longest time, it was just pretty much pure white and very Western. So there was no diversity there. So in terms of what got digitized then, it certainly did. I don't know how it does now. I don't know all of those concerns. Did anybody run into that?
Mine felt more like public memory.
Okay.
Yeah, I had one that mentioned, like it put forth hypotheticals. It's like if you found in the basement of a school old records, is it ethical, like if 30, 40, 50 years have gone by, is it ethical to use these, to archive them, right? It talked about students in a Native American school that they were forced into, and is it ethical to have access to those records when the parents didn't give consent over it? And then the moral of that article, it's kind of like advice for you was to pretend like anybody you're thinking about was your mother.
Yes.
Like how would that make you feel if whatever ethical archival question you have related direct, not even a distant relative, 3, like, no, it's your literal mother right now, and how would you look at it then?
But then you get into the troubling area of, okay, but if it's my mother, but this is like a record, am I taking something away from history and from the record if I take it out because I'm sheltering my mother?
Historical significance.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The authors provide insight into the ethical issues of archiving and digitizing endangered languages. In doing so, they point out challenges of such archived or digitized language and research of indigenous people of North America. One example that they give involves the Onondaga Indian tribe. They point out that once the work had been archived by the researcher through digitalization and reproduction of the work became cheap and easily distributed, questions of rights and access, which had previously been largely theoretical, suddenly required real answers.
I have an article similar to this. One of the researchers was working with tribes in Africa, hearing their oral stories that were passed down by generations. And his university was insisting on informed consent. And the researcher refused, partly because these people don't read that language, but they also don't trust documents where people say, here, sign this. They don't know what it is. If the researcher had not refused, the university would have owned the rights to those stories. And every time they told those their own cultural stories, they would have had to pay the university.
Oh my gosh.
How is that? I'm sorry, how is that ethical for a university to own stories? It's not.
It's probably that the research becomes the property of the university somehow.
Yeah, just like my teaching, all my syllabi, it all becomes property of the university.
No, it's still yours.
It's still mine, but it's, they can do what they want to with it.
Property.
Yeah, there's quote unquote co-ownership, but it's still yours.
Yeah, but the learning platform, D2L, that's not mine.
I can make it disappear if you want to. Say the word. Suspicious.
You think I know a guy?
I know a guy. He's me.
He's got a know.
A lot of folks went to McKee and Porter on archival research, which they consider a gray area since it is not published scholarly text, nor is it a person who can consent to research. And it always comes back that, can they consent to this research? If they're dead, no. Maybe their family can consent to it. So if a family says, here, we're giving you these documents, these historical documents, and we want you to keep them in your archive, and if you want to, you can digitize them. I suppose that might work, but I don't know.
What if that person didn't want the family to get consent?
What if that person hated the family?
Yeah. At what point do things like that fall into the or public domain?
Yeah.
Because it's not like copyright.
I did talk about that a little bit, about it becomes, when you die, your writings, it goes to your heirs, whoever you leave it to or whoever inherits it just by virtue of being related. And at that point, it's up to them. It doesn't matter what you wanted anymore. And now I imagine, and this is outside the realm of the English studies stuff that we were looking at, I could imagine if you so willed it to leave it to a lawyer published all Kafka's stuff after he died. That wasn't ever supposed to come out. And to ensure it wouldn't, he went to a lawyer who then put it out anyway. So it really kind of is, don't die. It's the moral of the story.
Or burn your stuff.
Yeah. This is like what happened with Harper Lee a few years ago. Like right before she died, her lawyer magically found, hey, here's her first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. Let's publish it. And there was a question of whether she was in her right mind and able to give consent.
Where literary texts, especially older literary texts prior to, a lot of these copyright laws, so much ethically questionable, so many ethically questionable things have been done in handling a lot of these texts. And, that pulp writer I mentioned in a previous class, Robert E. Howard, that his father had died. Howard committed suicide in his 30s. His father was a doctor. When he died later on, he had bequeathed the rights to his son's work to the person that cared for him while he was dying. But because the copyright laws in the 1930s basically protected the work for 25 years, once that 25 years has expired, those works actually fell into the public domain. And other writers took them, edited them, and they became their work that they could then make money off of. I won't name any names, but you see a lot of that with works that were kind of prior to, in writing and literature and things like that. There are a lot of contentious rights issues that kind of came up in the way that people did things with
just
text.
Unscrupulous.
Part of it was too, in those days, there was no computerized, and many times there wasn't a written record, right? For instance, Dr. Howard, bequeathing these rights to, Alma May. In the 1930s, it was kind of on his deathbed sort of thing, and people had to kind of take it at a word. And, if the word didn't get out, then somebody on the other side of the country decides, oh, these are all in public domain. I'm going to take these, edit them, call them mine, and make a bunch of money off them. Off track.
Well, the whole notion of having things available so easily on the internet has changed everything. So where in the beginning of discussing things like working online, that the being kind of anonymous was a way to break barriers for women and people of color and other marginalized groups. But that's not necessarily the case now. I mean, that's what researchers are finding regarding that potential. And rather, it seems to be, it's detrimental now. A lot of ethical questions we've never had to decide.
One of the articles that I came across, it might have even have been, there were two in my bibliography from McKee and Porter.
Yep.
And one was just talking about the simple effect of how far removed from the current period is the content that you want to digitize, right? Mm-hmm. That would be one in several considerations that you would bring up or consider when you're trying to make a decision about whether or not. But even then, I mean, time itself does not, 50 years removed, 70 years removed from somebody that's related to you, I don't know, still be sensitive, right? To your family or injurious to your family somehow.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
There's no black and white rules, I guess.
No, well, and actually,
just more guidelines.
That's what
else, right?
This post, that should have quotations marked around it all. Archivist historian Ronald Houston argues that an existing code of ethics for archivists usually acts to impede ethical determination and prevents an archivist from making individual decisions, because not that one shouldn't blindly follow the code and say instances are ethical, but that code might not apply to every situation. So that speaks to what you're saying.
Yeah, I came across that. It might even have been a related article, something very similar to that.
The complexity of power and control by archival institutions, and that goes very specifically to, for instance, the university that would have been able to collect and own those stories by that particular tribe. more than positive aspects of society and culture, but also the negatives. So what if we got a whole bunch of documentation? And this happens. I mean, nobody knew Jefferson's patchy past with Sally Hemings. Nobody knew that dodgy past, or just hardly anybody to speak of. And so, I don't know, when was it brought to light? 30 years ago or so that, children, he had children by her, that she'd kind of been a common law wife, even though he was married, and all of this. So here we find out the dirt on Jefferson. And we find out, I wonder how Hemings' family, offspring, what they thought about that being brought to light for public consumption. And the place of it. So historical material, which seems to be of importance, I think, because it offers some commentary on very important historical figure, and also exposes the irony and hypocrisy involved in part of that. So I don't know, does it matter that it's so historically significant? Or should that not be a consideration? Anybody want to be an archivist? I don't think I do. I would, but I don't think I would.
Yeah, that would be a hard one, just because Jefferson is he's a founding father of the country, right?
Right.
That's really a piece of history, particularly given the history of the country itself. An important point, I think, that you definitely, I don't know, I think that there's some benefits in the world at large, or America at least, knowing that from a historical perspective.
Or JFK and his numerous affairs.
So
a lot of people
less
did know
benefit,
about
maybe,
that, but they...
It's kind of scandalous. But of course, he had some affairs with some other famous people. So it also, I guess you could argue, also historically significant.
And Rock Hudson being gay.
Yeah.
These kinds of things that come out. Is that, I mean, we found it hit the magazines and some television.
You bring up an interesting question, though. Does by virtue of being a famous person, do you give up the rights to be protected that way posthumously? If you become an important part of the American discourse in general, right? You're part of the conversation of history and time.
Right.
There's a William Gibson op-ed. They talked. It was written in the wake of the debacle around the search warrants for breaking encryption on an iPhone, and Apple wouldn't help.
Yes.
He wrote basically that history makes a mockery of your expectation of privacy. It basically, in the arc of history, you have to balance your individual wants for it with, well, then is the state entitled to privacy? Are corporations entitled to privacy? And he just talked about basically on a long enough time frame, anything you think is important enough to keep private will just come out. And that's what we talked about. People's private life, right? I mean, how many times hacked and leaked and all this stuff and rumors and front page, and it's like, I don't care, but I guess there's a market for it. And an expectation, almost like you deserve it if they're a public figure. It's almost like you're entitled to know these aspects of their life. What?
Yeah, that's.
I mean, I know that's the theory, but
no, I don't think at all. I don't think at all.
But I do think that there's an expectation that we are entitled to know something about prominent figures in our culture. And after that,
there's still people.
We do that even with like family though. Like when people die, everything come out.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like it's just whenever you're a public figure, just more because more people knew you or knew about you, more people know. But it's the same. It's the same thing, you know, within our own intimate circle. So we give ourselves a level of intimacy with public figures because they are in the eye of all people. So you feel like you know them, and I guess that has to do with why we think that entitlement to the information that they have. But I just think that they're just not above what everyday people would do to you. Like if you die and you were doing something bad, it's going to come up. You know, like that's just what happens. So I just feel like for theirs, it's just on a grander scale. But it's the same for any of us that people gonna find out about you. You know, it's just a matter of timing that matters for you. The timing matters for you.
Unless you don't die.
Unless you, hey,
That's good.
Don't die.
Don't die.
Don't die.
Anything, don't say anything.
And this one, the authors argue that archival materials can be considered a manifestation of the people attached to those documents. So, yeah, we might think of these are just documents, but they represent real people, real live people and real dead people, and people who had lives and people who affected other people's lives. So, yeah, it's thinking about, instead of looking at it as just this thing we digitize, and instead looking at it as the person attached to it, makes it important. But this is only going to get bigger because of the nature of the archives. I mean, you look at the U.S. government and all of the texts, it's archived on World War II, on oh my God. And I think about Ken Burns and all of his documentaries that he's always done with the Civil War and, you know, those letters that.
Yeah, and personal letters. I never even thought of that until just now. Some of that stuff that gets published is really personal.
Yes.
I mean, these are people who don't know if they're going to see their wife, mother, father again. So they're communicating things. And then, hey, here's a collection of that. Why don't you read it? That's kind of dark.
It's also maybe that it's a snapshot of that person in that moment in time, and they might have evolved.
Right.
They might have been really, really one-minded about a very controversial issue at that snapshot, right? And much later in life, they evolved a much, much broader understanding of the difference of that. But they're pigeonholed to
They're
this.
caught there.
This is what people remember because it was so painful, or, you know, and just dismisses all this other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet you Ken Burns didn't get it. I mean, he might have gotten permission. Well, people probably fed him many of the letters from, but at the same time, I wonder how much consent was given.
So I'm watching Ken Burns' Vietnam War series, which is heartbreaking. But they just got to the episode about the Pentagon Papers and like how all this had been archived by the government. Basically, it was kind of outlining how they had just kind of deceived the public about whether or not we should be involved and whether or not we could actually win. And if he wasn't telling you that now, you know, that was really like, that almost got the New York Times thrown in jail, right?
Yeah, yes.
But if they hadn't released that, and if Ken Burns wasn't now 40 years later reporting on that, would we be less able or less willing to, you know, cast a critical eye on our government about some of the decisions that they make?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm sure we're going down.
Well, I see where you're going. Yeah.
No, that's a valid point. I mean, it kind of goes back to historical significance, right? And how do we consider the information that's given to us through different means. I mean, I think that without him making that information available, right, would we remain in the dark? I think that there was a lot of evidence that we were in the Vietnam War in particular, for all the wrong reasons, and that it was unwinnable for a number of reasons as well. But the simple fact that they
never made that mistake again, though.
Oh, yeah, that's right. ever. The key to ethical decision-making for archivists is recognizing the personness of archival materials, and that goes up again. It speaks to the previous one.
I read that article. That was they were talking about kind of it's a combination of the decision-making process where they had this diagram. It was like, if this, then this, answer yes, no, and then you kind of follow this flow chart to make a decision whether or not this is a piece of information that you could archive. Ultimately, their conclusion was, no, you can't just follow a flow chart to determine, but that there has to be, the point of it was exactly that comment, that you have to recognize the personness of the material that you're looking at and take into consideration. Ultimately, it boils down to, I think, the ethos of the archiver.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right?
It's not just the person who originated the material, but it's also the personness in the decision maker. Instead of outsourcing that decision to a flow chart,
yeah,
you have to actually make a personal judgment and use your own human perspective.
Institutions can choose which archival information they choose to share with the public and what archival information they keep tucked away. Good point, and one that I've made periodically this semester is how does that, and other semesters.
Who got the Mueller report first thing in the morning on Nook, the free downloaded?
Yeah.
As soon as it was released. Yeah. No, I did flip through it.
Just read the
largely uninteresting, but
just read his executive summaries.
Yeah, that was what I did. The details were, again, largely uninteresting and nothing new.
Now, and interviews and ethnography. Lots of ethical questions come up on this, and again, a little bit of reciprocity, but popularity of qualitative research, arguing that it is seen as a way to put humanity back in research. However, they point out the flaw in thinking there is a power disparity between interviewer and interviewee that might not be obvious to both parties. So, yeah, there's always going to be some kind of power differentiation there. And it's usually going to side with on the part of the interviewer, because the interviewer knows things that he or she may not be disclosing, for instance, or not even know he or she has that information, but it's there someplace. While beginning his research, he was at an advantage because he was a male. This was about a researcher doing ethnography on female gamblers. While beginning his research, he was at an advantage because he was a male researching female gamblers. Because gambling is gendered as male, he camouflaged well and was not required to reveal his identity as a researcher. However, when he told two women that he was a gambler, they immediately disengaged in conversation and fell to shame. Lee argues that when an ethnographer is researching secretive activities, it is important for the researcher to immerse themselves and participate in the culture. When revealing to the women that he was a researcher, Lee stated he felt he had unintentionally infringed their right to privacy, which resulted in Lee's inner conflicts. So, kind of a lurker.
Yeah, that's not ethical.
There's nothing ethical about that.
No article I encountered that would ever say, even the one that talked about using public information on a Facebook wall, like that has to be, you have to be upfront that you're affiliated with a university and you're doing research, even to access stuff that gets pulled up for you don't have to be friends with them. So that's a little bonkers.
Yeah. Hayden argues that allowing students to use their research allows for them to internalize their research, including making ethical decisions on what to include or exclude from the research assignment. So in this instance, the author of the article is making the argument that don't just have students research just to learn to research, rather to engage with that research and have them included in their own essay, include their standpoint or something about them in that essay. And that way, when they engage with the research, they hopefully can become more conscious of the things that they will include and won't include, and how that might affect other individuals who participate in some kind of study, or when they later become a researcher themselves, saying, yeah, I got to be more selective on what I'm doing here. So it's kind of a warm up to researching later as an academic. She argues that fan fiction cannot be treated as a published work because it is not academically published. Instead, it must be treated as if the authors are human subjects. She finishes the article with her own fan fiction page to show the merging of academic and fan fiction writing. So, fan fiction, I don't know very much about it. I know what it is. But is it just public? Some of it is, right?
Usually we post it somewhere online.
Okay, that anybody can access?
With the assumption that others are reading it.
I saw Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough lose her
bananas
over a person that she met. I went to a World Fantasy Convention in Austin in 2006, and a guy came up to her, and he had written all this fan fiction using her characters, and he was a huge fan, right? He brought a stack of books to get signed by her, and she ate him alive. She was furious, and I think that I venture to guess is based on some of the other commentary I've seen from other authors. They are not fans of all fan fiction. I think things that have it penetrated the culture so deeply, like Star Trek or Star Wars or Doctor Who, things like that, that are, you can't stop it, right? I mean, it's out there, but I know, some authors in particular very guarded about their intellectual property and would prefer to see people who write fan fiction dissolve.
Craig Johnson, Longmire fame?
Yeah.
Junkyard Dogs. He's television too, but he's a novelist first and foremost. And I haven't read his latest novel or novels from the last 2 or 3 years. I've gotten on different kicks, but I started writing fan fiction. But I emailed him and said, "Can I do that? Would you mind? And here's what it looks like." And he said, "Have at it. Have fun." So
it depends on the author, right?
Yeah, and it also depends on the content.
Successful too.
Yeah, it depends on the content as well.
And where is it going to go? What are you going to do with it? That sort of thing.
I don't think you can make money off it even if you wanted to, because a publisher is never going to let you infringe on that copyright.
Yeah.
So it can't.
So 50 Shades of Grey began as fan fiction of the Twilight franchise.
I know. But it didn't come out as that. It had to evolve into. And bad prose is bad prose. So I don't know. When that first came out, there were YouTube videos of people reading it in like serious voices. Which one was 50 Shades. Yeah, good point.
I haven't read 50 Shades. Should I?
I haven't read Twilight. So.
Well, I read one and I couldn't stand anymore.
I confess. So I had a nook, as I mentioned here earlier. I used to go to the Barnes & Noble bookstore. This is when the device was new, and I was trying to get the most out of it. Right? And when you go into the store, when you're actually in Barnes & Noble, they have books that you can read for free on your Nook. So I would never actually pick up this book and read it in public, right? But I confess that I read about the first 50 pages of 50 Shades of Grey on my Nook. Barnes & Noble.
We still love it.
Yeah, it's all right. I was like, yeah. All right, I see where some people would like this. It wasn't my thing, but
That's funny.
you know.
You actually know what all the
hubbub was about.
Did you read it for that purpose? Like, you know why you read it, 50 Shades.
The session
I knew why I read it.
Session's been recorded.
And now everybody knows. Is this going to be digitally archived? Yes.
Forever.
Do you need my consent?
Well, see, and
Now people are going to know I read 50 Shades. It's going to be damaging.
Yeah, you never know.
You keep repeating it too.
The worst thing they dig up is that you once read a book for free in a Barnes and Noble.
Yeah.
It'll be all right.
It's not
Barnes and Noble's consent.
which free book? That's what
It's illustrating the lost sales balance.
and coincidentally, this next thing speaks to what you've just said in some ways. For instance, the authors examine the type of ethical questions faced when considering the use of discussion board posts as data and research, because the original author of the post may have identified the space as a private and safe place to generate the work. So, I did a disclosure to everybody, my online students and my face-to-face, that we would be seeing each other's work. Now, but only in terms of discussion boards. So this material, I didn't put names to it because that's not from the discussion board. It's from, I picked these things out as talking points for the class. Nobody knows what belongs to whom. And I wanted to keep it that way for ethical reasons. But yeah, at the beginning of the class, I set it out. Here's what you need to know. It's going to be recorded. It's nearly impossible to find the recording of this, but somebody probably could encounter it at some point. And that I share discussion boards, because that's the way of keeping our class together. So that's just one of there are times, there's all that wonderful material. And I probably shouldn't have disclosed that FemBot thing. It was a student evaluation. It's not meant for public consumption.
That was 15 years
There's no
ago.
name next to it.
And yeah, I didn't even know who.
But those are publicly available, right?
Not from 15 years ago.
Oh, okay.
They might be now. Although I'm not sure that the actual written part is available. I think it's only the statistics.
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think it's only the statistics.
But it's as if they wrote it on like Rate My Professor, because
I know, right?
That's public. You know what I mean? Like I could go find anybody, and they could have wrote the exact same comment on there, disclosed to everybody.
They didn't. I've seen my Rate My Professor.
I always wondered if professors looked at Rate My Professor. Now
I haven't looked at it for a decade though.
I look at it
That's
before I
still a
take
thing?
the classes.
I don't know.
I did when I was in
I haven't looked at
undergrad.
it
It
in
was.
years.
It says that's still a thing.
The data is still out there.
Yeah, it's still very much out there.
Even if it's not used so much.
This is reminding me of Megan Opperman's dissertation. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, I know who she is, but I wasn't there for it.
So she was researching Tumblr posts centered around like genderqueer identity. And she said in her data collection, it had to be public posts, meaning you didn't have to have a login.
Right.
And 10 years old at least before she would consider it,
Mm-hmm.
assuming no privacy.
Yeah. And then here are other areas. They argue that research should use general ethical rules as guidelines, but should gauge the context of the situation to guide the way that they use these rules. Context, that's what kept coming up. What did you find about that? Those you're nodding.
Whenever I read one of the articles that dealt with the ethics of using action research. And so in the context of, it's It's after 9:30. My brain just died. Like, they have these ethical rules and standards. Every university does, and looking at the context of the class and how to separate yourself as teacher and yet researcher, and the students as students and also as participants, and how do you maintain both of those, and whatever you do, does your research suffer because of it? Because now, like, oh, I'm going to put on my researcher hat, like, and so it doesn't feel authentic anymore. It's not with suspicion, and like you can't just be like, oh, this is not going to work the way I thought it was at all. I'm making a knee-jerk decision to try to correct the course. You have to go back through the review board, which could take 2 months, and so like instead of having rules, they should be. That article in particular was arguing for guidelines, flexible guidelines. And if you think that it wasn't ethical, then we can chunk it once we've done it. But I don't know. I understand why we have them, but I also see like it threw a huge wrench into that research, and it could have been potentially awesome research, and it turned out to be crap because it got very confused.
Well, and you have to reveal the context too of the research. To pulling something out of context, pulling something that I say in class out of context and talking about it with somebody else is unfair, as is not providing context for fully understanding the research that a person has done. And, whether it has to do with, there can only be so much as a way to not disclose who the participants are. If education does a lot of research on students, and they can't divulge the name of the school, for instance, or the name of the teachers, or the name of the students. They have to disguise that. But the context still might be something like a university in Texas. There are plenty of universities in Texas, so it's not to be too confusing, but can't give material that is a clear giveaway as to what the subject, the participant is, where they might be. And then this person wrote about, took on the topic of disability and ethics. Oliver argues research on disability has not, now this is written in 1992. Oliver argues research on disability has not significantly or at all changed the lives and policies concerning people with disabilities. This means the ethics of research are skewed. But I think a lot has happened since 1992 in terms, maybe they hadn't given that research time enough to go through what it had. Oliver hadn't given enough time for the research to actually produce anything, to produce any kind of results, because things have very clearly changed, but not entirely, for sure. Not probably just in compared to what we should be, not at all, but still 1992, a lot of things have changed. So I don't know. I wonder how much could be attributed to research that academics do, and as to how much value. Because if we're talking about action, about my brain's pretty well done too, activism and social justice and things like that. The point is, we want to make a difference. Not just talk about it, but make a difference. I don't know.
Yeah, it was well done.
Are we done?
I don't know.
Guys want to talk about? Okay, can I show some of the article titles that you found?
Oh, sure.
Because they're kind of funny. No pressure.
Okay. Mine were all over the place.
No pressure. Land's sakes, it takes a long time to get to any place. Right, so there's doing research in people's homes. Ethics beyond the IRB, an introductory essay. Was that a bibliographic essay?
I don't remember.
I thought, isn't that funny? We kind of started out with bibliographic essays, finding bibliographic essays, and I think that's what this was. Yeah, it is. I couldn't. Can you speak to that?
I didn't fully understand that one, but so this researcher was a female. She was interested in participating in sexuality research, and I do mean participating.
Fully participating.
Yeah, on a nude beach in Europe somewhere, gathering data about the ethics of how ethical is it be. Where's just gone?
It's past 9:30.
How interrelated should the researcher be in those being researched? Like how close do you get to the research? How much should you remove yourself?
Wow, that's a challenge on a nude beach. Words. Wow, that's an interesting one.
I regret that I kept my research to composition.
Does anybody else want to share, want me to pop open theirs in here? See anything fun?
I don't think we can beat that.
Anything falls flat after that.
I know, right?
Won the game, Alex.
Well, I have to end the class period like we have for the last 3 weeks with some kind of laughter. That's a good one.
When it is.
Okay. Well, what do you think, folks? Shall we call it a wrap?
We had a good run.
I was saying to Jolene in library earlier, I came into this class feeling like, oh gosh, research. I'm not going to look forward to this, but it's been so much fun.
Oh, I'm so glad you felt like that. Yeah. Now, Alicia is not so thrilled. Her expression does not appear.
I like you.
Oh, well, thank you. I like you too.
I don't know that I would say that it was fun. There was a lot, and I learned a lot. A lot.
You agree with that? I learned a lot.
You'll be prepared for some of your other classes, I'm pretty sure.
I'm glad that I did this rather than
Right.
going further.
Yeah, and you got me at my very best. The very best that I've been for a long time. So,
You're going to get better than this.
oh, yeah, probably.
I mean,
Probably.
Are you taking the adolescent lit class?
I'm not taking anything this summer.
No,
that's
I'm talking
fall.
about the fall.
Oh, in the fall. I took a class, Dr. Reed's class in the fall. I was torn because I've enjoyed your classes so much. But I also enjoyed when she came and spoke, and I felt like And she had a good class. I
Dr.
think
Reed?
for Dr. Reed, I'm not going to remember the exact name of the class at this moment, but it was something like prominent writers of world literature.
Major figures.
Major figures.
Major figures. You're in that?
Yes.
And me too.
You too?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
You're going to read some good stuff.
Presumably.
I hope.
Major figures.
Is that online?
No, it's got a room number, but it's got an L1B, which I didn't know if that.
Blended.
Yeah. So it'll have components, but it's not in here. So it's in Talbot. So
Well, here's the deal on this kind of class. We're creating a classroom that will have all this stuff in
over
Talbot.
there. Oh, okay.
Oh,
Maybe
okay, so that's why your adolescent lit is over there.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, I was just let on the catch that it might be about 3 weeks into the semester before it's actually working, but we'll work through it. I'm working with things like Camtasia, and I'm going to be experimenting with that with the 697 for May Mini. See what happens with all that. Because I like the voice part. I think that probably helps some. Greg, what you got to say?
It's been fun.
I'm glad you think so. It's been a pleasure having you in this class.
Yes, ma'am.
Abigail? Closing comments, words?
I learned a lot about stuff that I didn't even realize I needed to know, so that was good.
Well, I've seen a lot of things happen in this classroom. You've reached some really great and reached in and gone beyond some achievements that I wanted you, or some goals that I wanted you to get to. So I'm really happy about that. I feel comfortable that you're going to do well in your other classes. I'm proud of what you've done in this class. All of you, online, streaming, face-to-face. I'm proud of what you've done. You faced the challenge, and look at you. And this is the hardest one I've ever taught. So congratulations, you made it through my hardest class.
So we need t-shirts.
I know, we survived.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Mike?
I survived 599.
Let's do that.
It'd be fun.
Yeah.
It's too soon to celebrate.
No,
I still owe you a paper.
Oh, and here's what I was going to say. Here's what I was going to say.
I did not turn that in yet. I don't remember that is.
I will send out an announcement at some point that where I am on grading, and that if I haven't graded something that I've not graded something that should have been graded, to let me know. But I'm not there yet. But here's what I had to send out a massive apology to online students because they turned an assignment in March, and I thought I'd graded it, but I hadn't. Early March. I know.
Life.
And so here, I mean, this is just indicative of how my brain works right now. Maybe because it's the end of the semester, maybe because it got too much in there, maybe because of leaky memory syndrome, which is something I made up. But yeah, I just entirely forgot. In fact, Thursday of last week somehow transformed itself into Friday. And the Dan Jones Memorial Walk Run was on Saturday. And so I was communicating with Dan's daughter and saying, be there for it. And I said, I'll see you in a little bit. And she says, it's tomorrow, not today. I thought, tomorrow? It's on Sunday? Because I was convinced at that point that it was Friday. Thoroughly convinced. So thoroughly convinced that I had gotten out of bed early, come to campus, was here at 7:30 in the morning, ready to, on what I thought was a Saturday morning, ready to participate. And there's nobody there in the parking lot because it's 7:30 on a Saturday, who would be? And except the people that are participating in the race aren't there. And I sent her a text and said, what? She said, it's tomorrow. I said, wait a minute. What day is this? Friday. So I had 2 Fridays. It was kind of disturbing.
So, do you know this?
Amen.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah, I was kind of celebratory actually that I had 2 Fridays. Anyway, it has been the greatest pleasure to be part of this class and to have met you this semester, some again, and some more later. Whoa! Was that you, Greg?
Yeah, I'm about to get struck by lightning in here.
You better check out and get home and be safe. Are you home?
No, I'm in my office still.
I thought so. I thought so. Yeah, we saw that lightning behind you.
That's creepy. Don't do that.
Wait! Oh my gosh, that could be a movie, a meta movie where we're watching, teaching this class. We've got people streaming in and crap's going on behind them. Don't look.
I don't give y'all permission to
Oh gosh. All right, so I know I'll see some of you again, and others, good luck to whatever you do. Be well. Live long and prosper. Let the Norse be with you.